We are live.
We are live. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amy DeBalos, also known as Amy D. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for episode 4 of San Jose Jazz Backstage. Backstage is a series of panel discussions and interviews by musicians for musicians. Oh,
He just
we've
wanted
got
to
some
make people
music.
laugh. That's all he wanted out of this world. He was
One.
All right, 1 second. We are live. Good evening, everyone. I'm hearing myself back. 1 second. Okay, it's gone now. Anyway, Backstage is a series of panel discussions and interviews by musicians for musicians. Backstage was founded in direct response to and in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. As jazz artists, we're responsible for upholding the history and roots of jazz as a Black art form. With Backstage, we're committed to having meaningful, courageous conversations as an expression of activism and to emphasize the truth that Black lives matter. I'm very grateful to be part of an artist-led team that partnered with San Jose Jazz to make these conversations possible, including Oscar Pangilinan, Nicole Boaz, Joy Hackett, and Arnie Coe. Before we get started, the views and information presented in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of San Jose Jazz. We invite you, our audience, to participate in the conversation tonight. Please submit questions using the Q&A function on Zoom. I already see about 11 folks have joined us. Thank you so much for tuning in on Zoom. And the Q&A will begin in about 40 minutes. So please submit questions and then we'll honor as many as we can with the time we have. Tonight's discussion will feature leaders in jazz: Colleen Bailey, Executive Director of the Monterey Jazz Festival; Pascal Bocard, entrepreneur and owner of Savannah Jazz in San Carlos; Brendan Rawson, Executive Director of San Jose Jazz; and we are very excited to welcome tonight's moderator, KCSM Jazz Radio curator and host, and truly a beacon in the jazz community, Sunny Buxton. Please join me in welcoming Sunny, Pascal, Brendan, and Colleen to Backstage.
Good evening to all of you. Good to be here, and nice to see you guys. And since most of us are involved with festivals, let's take it from the festival angle. And this is not an easy one because it's a big sprawling thing. But for more than 50 years, that means for more than half of a century, we've been doing summer music festivals of one sort or another. And most of the people have even erroneously identified their festivals as jazz festivals, starting with in this country with the Newport Jazz Festival in 1954, and then just a few years later, the Monterey Jazz Festival in Monterey, California. And then we have the SF Jazz Festival in the heart of the city. And festivals are all over the place, and many of them are identified, as I said, as jazz festivals, although some of them are not. We are confronted with something this year, and it's been going on for quite some time. And but the banner of Black Lives Matter is something that probably would have been pushed right, I think, in the heart of the festivals for this year, if the festivals were going to happen. And so that I think it's worth discussing to find out what the attitude might be, what people are doing, since we have this downtime. That means we can think, and we can start putting things together. And so with that in mind, thinking of Black Lives Matter, I'll go back to some early history of something that happened. The first jazz festival took place in France, and that was in Nice, France. And the first one was that they brought Louis Armstrong over, and it was a minor festival, but they followed it up the next year, which is around 1950. And they were not interested in any white musicians. As far as the French were concerned, if you said jazz, then you had to be talking about Black. And so by the time the Newport Festival took place, it was still predominantly a Black festival, although the local residents of Newport, Rhode Island, were certainly nervous about having a lot of Black patrons in that area. You might say the same thing about the Monterey Festival, which was just 4 years later, 1958. So what were they going to do if all of a sudden all these Black people sort of converged on the Monterey Carmel area? What was going to happen? And that was a stumbling block. Today, if you look at a jazz festival, it's going to be predominantly white and not predominantly Black. But nevertheless, there's still issues. There's an issue of history. Is that being sort of whitewashed? And so I think that's something that we can talk about. Colleen Bailey, let's start with you. You're the only lady on this panel. And you're with the Monterey Jazz Festival, which is the oldest one in Northern California. So let's talk about some of the stuff that I brought up. So first of all, welcome. Good to have you here and nice to meet you.
Sunny, nice to meet you too. Thank you.
So how much of an issue would that be this year, Black Lives Matter with the Monterey Jazz Festival?
Well, you know, I think there's no question that the artists would be responding to these times. Just recently, we've been putting together a virtual festival, and we've been talking to a lot of the artists, and we are using this festival as a platform to raise funds for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the Thurgood Marshall College Fund as our way of making a statement about how important this is to us. And to see how the artists are responding to this. I mean, they want to be part of that. They want to be part of the movement, and they want their voices to be heard. So there's no question that this is important to the artists, and I think important to the people who support the Jazz Festival today.
With the Monterey Jazz Festival, you guys, of course, hundreds of applications from people who want to be on stage, white, black, and all ages. So you have a commercial obligation as well as an artistic obligation.
Sure.
So how do you really ferret all that out? So now all of a sudden there's this other issue, which has been there all along, but not quite as prominent. When you say Black Lives Matter, that's always been an issue in music. And the distortion of the history of jazz is something that I'm deeply concerned with. And a lot of other people are also. So how do you really balance that?
Well, I think, first of all, you don't stand in the way of what the artists have to say. If you look at the artists on the stages of the Monterey Jazz Festival, they are to this day predominantly Black people. And so, you know, they're speaking their truth. And it is not, the Monterey Jazz Festival has never taken a role in terms of determining what they're going to say when they're on the stages. So we hire them, and sometimes they say things that disturb people. And I think Tim Jackson, who's our artistic director, would say that's when it's really working. So we're not there to make people comfortable. We're there to disrupt, and we're there to get people to feel something, you know, and sometimes that feeling is uncomfortable. This is obviously a moment when the historical context is uncomfortable. And I think that's exactly when the art is most important.
So have you guys been talking about this?
Have we been talking about this?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
The Monterey executives.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, it's been interesting actually sitting in the board meetings, and this has been, in fact, we have a seminar as the board is having a seminar about this particular issue at our next meeting. And we have a whole reading list of things that we're doing, and we're talking about what action we're taking and where we have a very important and specific role to play as a jazz festival that represents an African-American art form. And even what that means in terms of the context of the organization, the staff, the diversity of the board members who represent the organization and speak for the organization and make decisions for the organization, the diversity of our education program and the accessibility of our education program. So all of those things are on the forefront of what we're talking about as an organization right now.
The Monterey Festival people had a program going for, I understand that it's no longer in existence, where you went around to the schools and throughout that whole area. Is that
it's
still
still
going
in existence. Yeah,
still
so
happening?
very much. It's still happening. So
yeah, which I've always thought was a very good idea.
Yeah, well, we think so too. I mean, certainly reaching into the schools and making sure that everybody has access. It can't just be a 3-day festival. We've got to, do something that resonates with people and that makes a real difference in the community all year round. So we do that through our education programs. And it's really about building mentorship between those artists who play on the stages of the festival and the students in our community and people outside the community. So we have a next generation jazz festival that brings in students from all over the country, but predominantly it's still a California festival. We have a next generation jazz orchestra, which brings students from across the country to be part of an elite group of students who then tour and represent the United States. And then we have just new starting in 2018, because we were seeing that young women weren't well represented on the stages and in our education programs. We started a next generation women in jazz combo, and that program is thriving right now. So all those programs are all still very much alive.
All right, we'll get back to you in just a few minutes. Brendan
right.
Rawson, you're with the San Jose Jazz Festival, and talk about diversity. I was just looking at the city of San Jose, and with black, brown, and a little bit of everything. So then you say jazz festival. Is it really a jazz festival?
Okay, yeah, great question. I mean, an ongoing question too, right? That is something that I think is we always continue to talk about, and it's been part of our ongoing evolution. I did want to say just quickly on a couple of items, Sonny, before I jump. First,
Sure.
just in terms of really enjoying getting to be here with yourself and Colleen and Pascal. Appreciate everybody participating. One item to think of was Colleen's answer there. They also had this really cool program. I remember her mentioning one time that they were going to be rolling out with the University of Southern Texas for opportunities for young people to be working at the festival. So just as an item to that I think she should mention maybe further along in the conversation, because I think it's a real model program. But to your point, Sonny, also, you know what, I did want to mention first of all another item as kind of part of this whole process, and I think we're all learning.
Brendan,
Yep.
Do you have a list?
A list?
Do you have a list of things you want to
No,
mention?
no, this is it. This is the list of two.
I'm going to forget my question in a minute. Why don't you answer my question, and we'll get back to the things you want to mention.
That sounds great. That's fine.
Okay.
So we actually started calling the festival the Summerfest before I started working with the organization. I want to say it's probably about 10 plus years ago now. So officially, the actual summer festival that folks know us for is the San Jose Jazz Summerfest. And then we also started a San Jose Jazz Winterfest. And part of the thinking and discussion of that was actually to that point that we were creating a very large festival. I think we were 13 or 14 stages last year. And the reality is, yes, we are presenting a broad sweep of music. It's definitely a lot of jazz, but also a range of different associated music forms. So last year we had a gospel stage, or we'll feature what we call our Jazz Beyond stage, which is focused on young and up-and-coming artists and music that a lot of folks question us, is that jazz, and should you be doing that in this context of this festival? So we also present. Yeah, we also a New Orleans stage. We're doing Zydeco, and so that's been part of our work for quite a while. So that part of that we are a jazz organization at our foundation, and it's core to what we do. But Black music takes on all sorts of different forms. So the reality that we do present a fair amount of funk and a lot of R&B, we're sort of really excited about doing that. We think it's a great way to keep bringing more people to the music and sort of having the conversation crossing over between the different music forms.
The latter thought is a pretty important one, bringing more people to the music. One of the problems that we have had as a total community is that Black youth, for the most part, are not exposed to jazz. It's something that's foreign. It's almost as if it comes from another planet. So do you feel that you're making a contribution there?
Yeah, it's a great question that's also been coming forth in some of the earlier sessions of this backstage series. Now, there's been a few times that have come up in the other conversations about how organizations are how is the education work we do being really reflective of the jazz art form. So we do a couple of different things. We have like a high school all-stars program. We do summer camps that happen each year. We also do an after-school and in-school program in one of the school districts here in San Jose. And the opportunities to actually bring in jazz artists to present and participate, engage with the students and families, is something that we keep trying to keep folding in. We think it's really important to be connecting with students as early as possible. You know, in our programming, we go down to second, third graders is the earliest stage that we work at. But the occasion of to bring the actual professional gigging artists into conversation with students is something that we try to keep folding back into our education work, and it's an ongoing process, and feels like something you know, the young folks they're curious, naturally curious, right? So you're tapping into that curiosity of youth. But I also think, like, to the point of the things that we were mentioning, we started doing that Jazz Beyond stage as part of our programming. That it's a you know, style of music and an artist that we're presenting there that does connect with a lot of young people, and those musicians tend to be, you know, very much more informed and influenced by a lot of great jazz artists, and they're able to sort of show and put that out there to their fans and their patrons, and it helps bring that community along, understand what are the influences and background and
So Brendan, how do you evaluate the education part of it? How do you do that? Is it something that's part of the thought process? How do you do it?
Yeah. So a couple of pieces. One of the parts, so with like our progressions program, which is our largest education work, we work with upwards of 1,000 students across all the different grade levels and school sites that we do through that. That program has actually been part of the city of San Jose. It's part of this mayor's gang prevention program, and the 26 odd organizations that participate there's a formal sort of third party evaluation structure. So that's been nice because you having an outside entity to help take on the task of looking at these issues of youth development and sort of bringing the metrics and constructs of, you know, thoughtful educators around youth development to that. And then so we rely on that piece a lot. And with the older students, like our high school all-stars, that program is run by an educator here at San Jose State, Dr. Aaron Lincoln. And so that part of how we continue to grow that is about you know, finding them great opportunities to participate, you know, and how successful we are with hopefully getting them into the Monterey Next Gen Jazz Festival and settings like that. So that's kind of often an indicator for us on continuing to improve and develop the programs.
I'm going to move on to Dr. Pascal Bokar. Thank you very much, Brendan.
Yeah.
Dr. Bokar.
Yes, sir.
Good to hear you. Good to see you. And Pascal Bokar is a music educator as well as a musician, club owner, and also the founder of the Silicon Jazz Festival. So you're covering a lot of ground. So primarily, though, you are an educator. As I recall, that's where your heart lies, and that's where you have a lot of things to think about, a lot of things to do. So, are you satisfied with the way that the music education is going? You're a part of it.
Yeah, I'm a part of it by default, primarily because I found myself having to get a day gig because as a jazz musician, the music circuit had dried up to such an extent that I found out that most of my mentors from the time I was at the Berklee College of Music on forward ended up having to take teaching gigs in order to survive financially. From Donald Brown, who was with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, to Billy Pierce, to John Ramsey, the drummer, and the list is long. And I'm not satisfied at all. I realized that academia had played a very dangerous role in the removal of this art form that we call jazz from its community. all of a sudden, an art form that had been created by the Black community became diverse. And academia embraced that term diversity. And wherever that name, that term has popped up, it has actually resulted in the exclusion of African American from their natural role, both as educators, but as ambassadors of the art form of their forefathers. I found that very, very troubling. Jazz, as a music of the African American community, is inclusive by nature, just by the essence of its community. But there has been an effort, and a successful one at that, to remove this art form from the people who created it. And that's where it's very dangerous. When I talk to predominantly African American middle school and high schools, they are convinced that jazz is an art form of white people. And I can't say that I can blame them, because when I look at the faculty that teaches this Black art form, I find myself as the total minority. I can count on the fingers of one hand how many Black faculty are actually involved in the teaching of this Black art form, even to Black kids, let alone white kids.
See,
Why?
Pascal, you've heard a description. Sorry for interrupting. You've heard a description from two directors of major festivals, the Monterey Festival, the San Jose Festival. Do you think they're on the right course?
I think their heart is in the right place. I also think that both of their festivals present a lot of very high caliber music, and they are presenters of great Black music. I am concerned by what I've seen across the country from one coast to the other, that most directors of education for jazz are not African Americans. When I look at the faculty teaching in those festivals, they are not African Americans. In fact, African Americans find themselves the minorities in all of these festivals across the country. There has been, I mentioned earlier, the festivals are now taking the place of the great patrons of this American art form we call jazz. John Hammond, Norman Granz, George Wynne.
George Wynne, yes.
They had
George Avakian.
Yes, they had a commitment.
Yes. But they're all white.
They're all, yes, because that's
so why is that?
That's not mutually exclusive. America depends, the success of this nation depends on people like Colleen and people like Brandon to ensure that the art form that has defined this nation is represented by its rightful heirs. And that means that African Americans have to be front and center of this art form. They cannot be in the back. Rosa Parks for too long. Duke Ellington said one thing that was very important that the African American community forgot. He said to the African American community in New York, in Harlem, he said, do not call your music jazz because it will be taken away from you. Call it African music. And as long as you call it African music, it will remain yours. The minute we embrace the term jazz, there came the long teeth of the wolf of the industry.
Yeah. Very,
and
very interesting.
effectively took, and we see that in academia. I cannot, when I went to the Berklee College of Music, I came from Africa, and I was convinced that I would see statues of Armstrong and Ellington in the hallway. I was shocked to find out that less than 5% of the faculty, 5%, was of African American descent. And it has been my experience in every single academic setting I have been to. And there's something fundamentally wrong about that. And we need to fix this. They're requiring African American jazz musicians to have a master's degree to teach this music in college. These people have been on stage with names that are in the pantheon of jazz. We don't have time to go and get degrees and be proficient in this art form, and yet it is a requirement. Dizzy Gillespie was never invited to be the dean of a music school. Neither was Duke. It is absolutely insane to have these masters of this art form and put them in a situation where they cannot pass on their craft and make a living out of the art form of their forefathers.
True enough. Pascal, you're giving us a lot of information to chew on. Let's do it. Colleen, let's get back to you with the Monterey and the programs that you have that you mentioned, and they all sound very good. The evaluation is something that I'm sort of stuck on. I'd like to get back to that because I asked that Brendan. How do you evaluate the educational arm of what you're doing?
Well, we have sort of a formal evaluation process. So every student gets to evaluate their experience with us. Every teacher gets to evaluate. The band directors get to evaluate. In some cases, parents get to evaluate their experience. But recently, we had a third-party evaluator who came in. I really take Pascal's words to heart, and I think he's right. And I think changing some of these long-standing traditions and some of these, bigger organizations is not quickly done. And one of the things that I saw when I came into the organization is exactly what he's saying, and that we didn't have we didn't have women represented. We didn't have teachers going out into the schools that represented the African American community at all, the Black community. And so that was actually, I wanted to have a third party evaluator come in and tell me, what do you see when you go out into the schools? Are the kids connecting with the teacher? What is their experience? And we got a lot of information back. And one of the things he pointed out, one of the major things he pointed out, was that the students weren't seeing themselves reflected in the people that we were bringing into the schools. And that was a missed opportunity.
Was that a revelation?
No, but I needed a third party evaluator to be able to, who wasn't me. so that I could go to the people who can empower me to make the changes that I needed to make. And to their credit, they heard it, and we were able to make a change. And so we have completely shifted the people who are representing us with students especially. And so I'm really happy. Gerald Clayton, the jazz pianist and composer, has now taken over as the director of our education program. We have this year Christian Sands as our artist in residence, who's working on all our education programs. Derek Hodge helped us to launch a new program that is specifically working with Texas Southern University as a model for what can be done with the HBCUs across the country. Because like Pascal says, what we're seeing is that, these African-American students weren't weren't given the opportunities to learn about and to study their own music. And so we wanted to make the change, and we wanted to make sure that there were Black people who were actually the teachers of this. So we were just the conduit between the HBCU and these artists, and the connections that we made in just a very short time have been extremely powerful. And I think are where we want to take our education program as we move forward. All of the conversation about Black Lives Matter and so on is just kind of jump-started or jolted our organization from the board on down through the organization to make a quicker change and to make this a top priority of the organization.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brendan, if you were in full operation this year and this summer, and an organization contacted you that represented Black Life Matters, how would you handle that? I mean, you'd have a meeting that I would assume, but then from that point, what would you do?
Well, I think we'd be pretty quickly trying to figure out a way to work together. I think the fortunate thing that we have with the summer festival that we present, right, is that it's such a big tent type of festival and kind of take over the downtown, and we're present with street closures and in the park and indoor venues, etc. So a big part of experiencing our festival is about all of these varied settings and activities that you can accomplish in that regard. So we've often worked with different partners that to have a presence at the festival, and see if there's a way to sort of do community building work. I mean, at the core, a lot of what San Jose Jazz is founding and mission is about community building through the jazz art form and through music. So we're often kind of finding ways to bring different partners into that mix. And I've always even encouraged other sort of local San Jose nonprofits, mainly arts organizations, but also different social justice organizations and other community-based groups, that to use our platform. We're bringing 40,000 people into the downtown on that weekend. Use the occasion. It enriches our festival experience, and it's part of what we're about. So the opportunity to work, say, with a Black Lives Matter associated organization, whichever one it might be.
You would welcome that.
I would, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we work with different, the
most
lakes
likely will happen next year, I would imagine, if
I hope
everything
so.
is back in operation. The organizations that represent Black Lives Matter certainly won't disappear. And, and as I said earlier, I could see them making contact with all of you guys for this year, SF Jazz, San Jose Jazz Monterey Festival, and so on. They certainly would be there. So I was really curious about what your reaction would be.
Yeah, I think for us, it would be trying to find a way to incorporate and provide, use our platform to have that public dialogue around that issue. It kind of to the point, actually, Sonny. So like the item that I wanted to mention at the start was just to call attention to the issue around Breonna Taylor. I mean, I think for an organization like San Jose Jazz, it's follow the lead of something like we're seeing with the NBA today, this past week, and a lot of the players that were in their interviews. First of all, not talking about basketball, but talking about the issue that there's still not justice for Breonna Taylor, and that, not to let that go by the wayside, and to, when you have an occasion and an opportunity and a platform to talk about it as an organization like us, to do it and to hold that space for that to happen. So for example, we had talked here about with this forum, what might we do and how could we encourage? So very simple one is encouraging folks to voice their opinion with the Kentucky Attorney General. And it's pretty straightforward and direct. It's attorney.general@ky.gov. At ag.ky.gov. And I think it's part of incumbent upon arts organizations, music organizations, jazz organizations to not separate ourselves out from the the lived experience of the Black community, right
True.
now.
But there's
give
another
voice.
underlying thing, Brendan. When you talk, and what you're saying is valuable, but just the basic survival for the people in your own backyard is pretty important. So if we
Absolutely.
don't do that, we've accomplished nothing. So I think we really have to do that. So we have the education part of it that Pascal was talking about, which is extremely important. Jobs, the commercial end of it, you're hiring people. So we have agencies contacting you, and they have packages. I'm aware of that. So we have package A, we have package B, if you want to take this. So, and you're expected to make some money, not stage acts to lose money. So that in itself is difficult. But then in the meantime, you have a lot of people who reside here in the Bay Area who are also looking for work. They'd love to be on the stage. So that's a difficult balance. And it seems to me that even the outside people could assist there. They could assist in doing the seminars, the teaching. And also, if they're making a lot of money, that's only a handful, but make a donation.
Yeah. We're I think as Colleen mentioned that a lot of their festivals, so California, I think speaking of the Next Gen Festival, I think, when our Summer Fest, it's about 130, I think, performances that happened. And, the majority of that is the greater Northern California artists that are represented. And certainly, we work with a range of, larger acts or touring acts that we bring through, and always trying to find and evolve the right balance of music that we're presenting. It's an interesting challenge here in San Jose. I think too, kind of Pascal's comments were making me think about, how do we do this work and around this art form in a place like San Jose or in Silicon Valley, right? And Santa Clara County, the African American population now is below 3%. It's like 2.6, 2.8%.
It's roughly the same in San Francisco.
Yeah, and that's what's happened to the Bay Area over the past 40, 50 years. But
even for the Brendan, even for the survival of the music itself, just telling the truth is very important. Whether or not it has to go directly to young Black youth, which is very important. But in the meantime, making sure that history is told straight with a straight line. That's extremely important. No matter who's grasping that. Let me move over to Pascal. Thank you very much, Brendan.
Yep.
Pascal, you formed something called the Silicon Jazz Festival. Why that, and what is that all about? Silicon Valley Jazz Festival. Pascal, are you there? Did we lose Pascal?
He's just unmuting himself.
Yeah.
Oh. All right, throw you there. Did you get my question?
Yes, I heard the question. So the same way I became a PhD by default, the same way I became a club owner by default, the same way I became the founder of a jazz festival by default, because I realized that I couldn't find anybody that looked like me, actually short of you, who had a jazz club, you, Sonny, who actually owned a jazz club and presented bands on a daily basis. And then I started looking at the festivals, and I was like, I don't see any founder of any jazz festival that look like me either. And yet, they're all called jazz. And so what can I do about it? And as a result of this, I brought in people like John Faddis. I brought him to the schools of the peninsula. He's probably the scariest trumpet player on the face of the planet.
Yeah, and he's a Bay Area product.
He's an Oakland born treasure, selected by Dizzy Gillespie. He is an heir to that musical style. And I found myself to be the only one to actually take him from schools to schools to schools to schools. And he knows, about 1,000 African-American jazz practitioners who could come and present this art form to schools. I know 1,000 African-American educators who living right here in the Bay Area and don't have enough work, who could come and present and help the big organizations. And I found myself, I said, well, let me have a festival and see what I can do. And I bring all these Black people to the schools, and the kids, who are majority white, see these Black people for the first time. And they look around, and the few Black kids who are in the schools, predominantly white, are like, hey, this was one of us. He's talking to us about jazz. And it's a revelation. It's a revelation to all the kids. And that part is so important. And I had to do that because everywhere I went, Sonny, everywhere I went, the director of these programs were European American, they were white, and there were hardly any Black instructors. That has to stop. It absolutely has to stop for the survival of the essence of this art form. Black musicians have to be able to teach their music to the next generations of Americans. Otherwise, we will lose the essence of this music. This music was not born. The art is a crystallization of the pain, the suffering, the hopes for the future of a community.
And the joy.
Hopefully the joy, yes.
Yes, hopefully the joy.
And
it's a rather sad commentary when you run into youth that really don't have any concept of what you're talking about. And you realize how much ground we have lost and how much we have to gain. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
It is.
Pretty amazing.
I had to write a book, Sonny. I had to write a book it's called From Timbuktu to the Mississippi Delta, to reconnect this art form to the populations from West Africa who came to North America and Central America, the Caribbean, South America, to reconnect this art form to their rightful heir. Because every single book of jazz talks to me about how the diversity of jazz was born in New Orleans moving forward, when the reality is that millions of Africans from West Africa came to this country, created this art form out of an African instrument that is today the central instrument of Nashville that we call the banjo. The banjo is from my country of Mali.
Yeah.
And somehow none of that gets through the curriculum. And yet we are shocked. When I go and speak to Black kids about this amazing art form and the amazing aesthetics that this population group created for this nation, and the Black kids think that it is an art form that was created by the Benny Goodman of the world, or the Paul Whiteman of the world, or the king of rock and rolls of the world, and so forth and so on. That has to stop.
Yeah,
my passion.
Right, Pascal, thank you. Do we have questions from viewers?
The Q&A is pretty quiet, but I think that speaks
pretty
to the depth of the conversation that's going on. We are coming up on the 8 o'clock hour, so I think gathering some conclusions or some action items for next steps.
All right, I'll get back to Colleen. So we have a lot of work to do, obviously.
Obviously.
It's a major obligation. Well, I think for quite some time, people would undertake the notion of staging a festival and say, well, we're going to have a lot of music for people. But I think there's a lot more responsibility online than just simply setting up a bunch of stages with putting musicians up there and letting it go at that.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't think there's any question. And I think as we see the audience for jazz shrink, we have an obligation to make sure that it survives and that the history is told and is told accurately. So we have a lot of work to do. There's no question. And one of my concerns is, given everything that we're facing right now with COVID and so on, you see the budgets for arts programs, for school programs in the arts and nonprofits in the arts shrink, that that there will be even more challenged. So I think this is an important time that we stand together. Brendan and I have been talking, just as he was inviting me to be part of this, how we can work together, how we can work together with other organizations and other people all the way across the country to salvage what we have and to get some work done, to make things right, and to keep this music alive.
Thank you. Brendan, you got the message.
Yeah. Well, I think to your question there, right? It's some important work, right? And
yes,
not just in the form of creating a better festival or a better, or a great, sort of experience. I think, building off of Pascal's comments there on, that there's some major important culture work for America that, that the indebtedness.
It's for all of us.
Yeah.
We do have work to do.
I think that I guess the part there that there's some incredible assets and resources to build upon, right? I mean, we're very fortunate that there's still exceptional music that people, when they have the opportunity to experience and learn it, the depth of the experience that it opens up for folks is so wonderful, right? So we know we have this great treasure that comes from the Black community and the Black experience. And I think part of it is, how do we, in our, whether it's festivals or education programs, really keep holding that up as an exceptional, gift to the, we always talk about it, right, Jazz?
I think we start with honesty and knowledge. And if we sort of rely upon those two things, that's a big help. There's a lot of dodging and funny stuff going on, which is unfortunate. We have a lot of revisionists out there, and not only in music, but in everything else. But somehow or another, it's gotten involved with music. So people are revising as we go along. If we take it as it is, it's pretty wonderful. And it is the American classic. Thank you very much, Brendan. Let me move on to Pascal before we get out of here.
Sonny, we have one question from the audience,
yes.
from Susan. And I'm not sure who would like to take this specifically, but what do you see as your responsibility to honor the contributions of Black women as presenters, I'm assuming?
Good question. Any takers?
Sure. Well, I would chime in just that, that us to find more opportunity, right? To create more opportunity. I mean, I think what we do as an organization, right, as a festival producer or education programs provider, is to continue to try and create more opportunity and prioritize, bringing those folks and those experiences into it. So how do we create more opportunity for Black women musicians, instructors, to be able to perform in front of audiences and work in the classrooms? And have it be a key part, I think, to Pascal's point, right? That it's so important that future generations, folks that are new to the music, see it being performed and presented by Black people. And having more women certainly would be a key part of what we should be doing.
Thank you, Brendan. I think we're just about out of time, if I'm not mistaken. And it's been a pleasure. My name is Sonny Buxton, by the way. Brendan Rawson is the fellow that we were just talking with. Colleen Bailey from the Monterey Jazz Festival. Pascal Bokar, Savannah Jazz, Silicon Valley Jazz Festival. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to the crew, the committee. And I hope that we gave you something to think about and something to talk about, and also something to take some action revolving around it. That's pretty important. Do something. Don't just think about it, do something.
Thank you so much, Sonny, for being a wonderful moderator and facilitator of this conversation. We sure have been putting in a lot of effort to have meaningful conversations, and having your voice to guide us has been really extraordinary. So thank you. And on that note of causes to support, did any of the panelists bring a cause or a recommendation for a cause for our audiences to support this evening?
Yeah, buy a jazz record.
Buy a jazz record by a Black artist, potentially. Yes. Anyone else?
Ricky used to say, buy a jazz record.
Yeah,
I
get a nice 12-inch vinyl.
Colleen,
That'll
did you
be
have
very
something?
helpful.
You know, what I shared with Oscar was that, you know, as I said at the beginning of this panel discussion, was the virtual Monterey Jazz Festival will be a way to support 2 organizations. We have information about that in the link, which is to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. So those are 2 groups that we would turn people's attention to.
And what are the dates for the virtual festival?
The dates are the dates we would normally have had the in-person event, which is September 25th, 26th, and 27th. We're providing 2 hours of content each day from 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Thank you. Brendan, Pascal, Sunny, anything else to add before we close?
No, I don't. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Good evening,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
We're
you
going
all.
to
Thank you, everybody.
San
Thank
Jose
you,
Ba-
everybody.
Good to
Jazz.
see all of you.
San Jose Jazz
Good to see you
Backstage
guys.
is going to be taking a little bit of a break in August, but you can expect a whole other series of discussions to happen in September. So thank you so much for all of your support through the month of July and the 4 sessions that we've had. And thank you to the panelists and moderators who've been a part of this. Thank you so much and good
Thank
evening.
you. Good night.
Night.
Night.